So it's 6 o'clock. I will get things started here. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I wanted to just give some brief introductions before we get started. My name is Matt Bockler. I'm a senior planner at the Wyndham Regional Commission. We are hosting this meeting this evening and invited Alex Weinhagen from the Land Use Review Board to attend to speak about some of the Act 250 reforms under Act 181, specifically Tier 3 and the road rule. And I have some introductory remarks and comments, but I wanted to give Chris Campany, our executive director, and Alex Weinhagen a chance just to introduce themselves, just so you can see who they are before I give a couple introductory remarks.
Hey, thanks, Matt. I'm Chris Campen, Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Commission. Appreciate everybody here in attendance. And Matt, can you make me a co-host?
Yes.
Thanks. You might want to make Alyssa a co-host too.
And while Matt is doing that, I'm Alex Weinhagen. I'm your representative from the Land Use Review Board, the Act 250 program. Good to see everybody. Tell you more about myself when we get to that part of the show.
Thanks. So I think as many of you know, Wyndham Regional Commission is in the process of updating its regional plan to address some of the changes to regional planning that were included in Act 181. So we've had a chance to begin to meet with our towns to review updates to our plan. And during this process, we've understandably received a lot of questions about some of the other aspects of Act 181, mostly regarding Tier 3 and the road rule, those reforms to Act 250. So to kind of help address some of those questions, we set up this meeting and invited Alex to attend to address specific questions around Act 250. I have a few just introductory slides just because I did want to just provide an overview very briefly about Act 181 and our regional plan update, just to clarify our role versus the Land Use Review Board's role. Also, I just wanted to go over a couple kind of meeting guidelines. I know there are a lot of questions, but we're going to ask for folks to save questions until Alex has had a chance to present. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. If you'd prefer to type in questions into the chat box, that's also an option. We will also reply to questions in the chat box at the end after Alex has presented. And then just to ask, if if you've had a chance to ask some questions and other people are waiting to ask questions, please give other people a chance to ask questions as well. We are recording this meeting, so it will be posted on WRC's website. So if you know people that were not able to attend, you can direct them to our website. We'll have that posted in a couple days for people to review. So just briefly, Act 181 was legislation that was passed in 2024. It makes, well, sorry, I've got a few slides that I'll bring up here. Let's see. Okay. So Act 181 was passed in 2024 by the state legislature. It makes some major changes to Vermont's land use planning and regulatory framework. So it includes new requirements for regional planning commissions in their regional planning efforts. It also reorganizes the state designation program. So many of our towns have designated village centers through that program. So it did make reforms to that program. And then it also overhauls Act 250 jurisdiction. And that's the main thing we'll be talking about tonight. As I mentioned, we are in the process of updating our regional plan. because of some of the changes in Act 181. So we last adopted our regional plan in July of 2025. That was our most recent update to our plan. We've had a plan for the region going back decades. And so we're really, with this current update, we're really just addressing changes that are included in Act 181. And those are mainly in our housing and land use chapters. So we're required to include regional housing targets as well as local housing targets based on analysis completed by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And then we're also required to update our regional future land use map based on new statewide land use categories that were included in Act 181. But those are really the only changes we're making to our plan with this current update process. Just a reminder as well, for our regional plan, it's not a regulatory document. We at Windham Regional Commission don't have any regulatory or permitting authority, similar to what a municipality has in terms of land use development and regulations. So our plan is really just to provide policy guidance for our region, and it establishes our work plan and actions that we take as a regional planning commission. As I mentioned, Act 250 creates changes in terms of Act 250 jurisdiction. And so there's a new tier system that was developed. And based on these different tiers, determines whether or not a permit is required under Act 250. So just in terms of the tiers and responsibilities, so Windham Regional Commission and regional planning commissions in the state are responsible for mapping those areas that are eligible for what's called Tier 1. These are areas where growth is most suitable, just based on existing land use regulations and infrastructure to support growth and development. So that eligibility is based in part on how we are completing our regional land use mapping using those new statewide land use categories. Again, our mapping is not impacting local regulations, so areas that are mapped as Tier 1, it doesn't have any impact or change on how a property can be used. That's still determined by local land use regulations. So under Tier 1, there are Tier 1A areas that are fully exempt from Act 250 permitting. And then there's also Tier 1B areas. These provide partial exemption for housing projects that include up to 50 units and on 10 acres or less of land. The other two tiers, Tier 2 will really cover the vast majority of the state. Tier 2 is everything that is not falling under Tier 1 or Tier 2, or Tier 3, excuse me. And Tier 2 is generally the status quo under the current Act 250 program. So generally, under the status quo, an Act 250 permit is determined by the size of a project. So certain projects don't trigger Act 250. It depends on, too, whether or not a town has local land use regulations or not. The new road rule, which Alex will be talking about, does apply in Tier 2 areas. Tier 1 areas would be exempt from the road rule requirements. And then Tier 3, which we'll be talking about tonight, these are areas with critical natural resource areas and areas that are designated as Tier 3 may require an Act 250 permit if it's a proposed development that's not exempt from those requirements. As Alex will be talking about, the Land Use Review Board was given the task of mapping Tier 3 areas and developing the rules for Tier 3. So the Tier 3 mapping and rulemaking process is still underway. And so this is a good opportunity to learn about that process and provide feedback while it's still being developed. So this slide tries to just provide a general framework for everything that's included in Act 181 in terms of the different changes. So the statewide, regional, future land use categories are shown along the top of the slide. And what we're mapping as downtown and village centers will automatically become centers under the new state designation program. And planned growth area and village areas will become neighborhoods under that new state designation program. So one of the goals was to tie the state designation program with regional land use planning and to make it an easier process for towns to enter into that designation program and receive the benefits from it. And then below that, you'll see the Act 250 tiers and how that relates to the regional future land use plan. Again, our mapping only impacts eligibility for Tier 1A and Tier 1B. So it doesn't impact Tier 3 eligibility at all. And another change under Act 181 is regional plans and future land use maps will now be approved by the state land use review board. So in addition to overseeing the Act 250 program, the land use review board will also be approving regional plans from across the state. Once those are approved by the land use review board, those state designations become automatic for a town, so a town does not need to apply for state designation. And then also towns that are eligible for Tier 1B exemption automatically get enrolled in that exemption if they opt in once our regional plan is approved. Just one last slide here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alex. I appreciate your time. I just want to provide just some context in terms of what Wyndham Regional is working on currently. So for our regional plan update, we are working towards completing our update by this fall. We need to have an approved plan in place by the end of the year to address the Act 181 requirements. So we've been right now we're in phase 2 of this process with meeting with towns to go over the future land use plan and also reviewing the regional and local housing targets. We're going to have a draft of the regional plan completed this summer, and then we'll be submitting to the Land Use Review Board in the fall. So there's plenty of opportunities to review our plan and provide feedback on our regional plan in the upcoming months.
Eileen asked how municipalities opt in.
Well, let's see. So just to go back to this slide and to respond to the question from Eileen. So for Tier 1B, areas that we map as a downtown or village center or planned growth area or village area, those areas are eligible for Tier 1B. There are some additional requirements beyond just our land use mapping for Tier 1B. So that includes, importantly, either having municipal water or wastewater or adequate soils within the area that a town is seeking Tier 1B exemption, adequate soils for on-site septic systems. A town also needs to have adopted zoning bylaws and subdivision bylaws to be eligible for Tier 1B. So, I say that downtown and village centers and planned growth in village areas are eligible for Tier 1B, but that is just one prerequisite. So there are some additional criteria. And as we're meeting with towns in our region, we do at this point just have a handful of towns that qualify for Tier 1B exemption. So we are letting towns know if they qualify. Towns that may not qualify today but are interested we can also work with you to help you understand what steps you would need to take to qualify for Tier 1B exemption. We're in the process of updating our plan now, and that will include, when we submit our plan, that'll include submitting requests for Tier 1B exemption. But once we go through this process, we can always work with towns to submit Tier 1B requests in the future. So this isn't your only chance um, to apply for that Tier 1B exemption. That's something we can do in the future as well once the update process is completed.
And
So,
Matt, before you turn over to Alex, I was going to just mention one thing about commenting, but just tell me when you're ready.
oh, go ahead. Yep.
So before I was with Wyndham Regional Commission, at one point I was the federal policy coordinator for this group called the National Campaign for Sustainable Agriculture. And a lot of my work was involved with helping farmers and other folk interested with interest in the Farm Bill on how to comment on legislation and rulemaking. And I just want to note that Alex is incredibly accessible. It's great that he's made himself so accessible in this rulemaking discussion. But something for the public to think about is if in what he presents and what you have concerns about, if it's related to the legislation itself, you really need to address that to your legislators, because there's not much that Alex can do about that. If you have comments on the rules, which are the things that Alex and the Land Use Review Board are working on, that's where he can that's where he's genuinely looking for feedback on the rule and the evolution thereof. And one of the things I would just encourage you to do too is offer comments not only on the things that maybe you have concerns about, but also things that you like. And Alex is going to talk about the evolution of Tier 3 and the road rule over time. And if there are things you like about, like how that's evolved, or things you have concerned about, make sure you comment on all those things, because it's important not to assume that everybody's going to share your same view. So just wanted to put that out there, just just to kind of maximize your efficacy in your comments. That's not policing them at all, just advising, just make sure that, he can't do a whole lot about Act 181, but he can help on the rules. So just wanted to share that. All right, I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Matt. Matt, am I also in the co-host category so I can share a screen here for a little presentation?
You should be, I see you listed as a co-host.
Okay.
So
I haven't tried yet. I was just
okay.
asking.
Okay.
Yeah. So before I throw a bunch of slides at all of you, thank you very much for coming. And I'm going to try really hard to make my presentation short, because I want to have as much time as possible to hear your questions and have the conversation be a little more organic that way. Comments, questions, concerns, all that stuff. So quick, by way of introduction, again, Alex Weinhagen with Land Use Review Board. The Land Use Review Board is the oversight board for the Act 250 program. So it's a 5-member board. I'm one of 5. We were all appointed by Governor Scott last year, so we're relatively new. Prior to us, Act 250 has been around for a long time, 55 years. Prior to us, there was a natural resources board comprised of 1 full-time chairperson and 2 volunteers. And that 3-member natural resources board was the oversight board for Act 250 and had been for a very long time. And with the passage of Act 181 in 2024, that shook things up. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways it's shaking things up in terms of Act 250 jurisdiction, but just the organization of the program changed. And so the 5 of us that are the oversight board, we are all full-time professional level people. We're not just political appointees. Like there were certain requirements for professional expertise that we needed to have in order to be eligible to be appointed. And then it was the governor was served up with some options, and then he selected the final board members. We served for a number of years. And because the Act 250 program, it is within the executive portion of state government, but it is an independent agency. And so, although we're in under the governor's purview in terms of the executive function of state government, we don't actually report to the governor. He appoints us, but once we're appointed, we serve out our terms. And so there's a little bit of insulation there. If we make a decision that the governor doesn't like, he cannot remove us. And the legislature set that up on purpose because there'd been some issues in the past with the Act 250 program, people having a perception that there was some political influence there. So with that as a preface, I'll tell you that each of the five of us on the board come from different backgrounds, and my background is in municipal planning. So I spent 22 years as the town planner for the town of Heinsberg, trying to help them figure out what they wanted to be when they grew up. And my academic training is in wildlife. Prior to being in community planning, I was at UVM doing master's work up in the kingdom. And I grew up here in Vermont. I grew up in Chittenden County in Essex Junction. And went away for school and initial part of a professional career, and then came back and have been here for a long time. So enough about that. Let me share my screen, tell you a little bit about Act 250 and what we're working on with regard to the changes. Okay, so apologies to those of you that have already seen bits and pieces of this presentation. There's a little recycling going on here, but like I said, I'll be quick and get to questions and conversation. Act 250 is the state's land use development law. So if you're not familiar with it, it's sort of like what towns do at the municipal level with development review boards and planning commissions, where a development proposal comes forward, and if it requires an Act 250 review, then there's a volunteer board. They're called district commissions that review those applications and issue permits. And it's a balancing act. Its intent is to further housing and economic development, but not at the expense of Vermont's landscape. And it's part of the reason why Vermont looks a little different than other areas of the country. It is a citizen-based review process. And so, like I said, there are 9 district commissions across the state that hear Act 250 permit applications. And those applications are broken up into 3 categories. Major projects that are what you're probably familiar with. That's what you hear about in the media all the time. Those are projects, larger projects that actually have a public hearing. There'll be site visits. Neighbors can come to that hearing. Different parties can provide testimony, and then there's a decision. Those are actually by far the smallest portion of what Act 250 permits are from year to year. The vast majority of Act 250 permits never go to a public hearing, never have any neighbor opposition, appealed, and simply get approved after a draft approval is mailed to adjacent parties, and with the proviso saying, we think this project should be approved. Here's a draft approval. If you have any issues, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to approve it. Those are the minor projects. And they make up the vast majority every year of Act 250 permitting. And then there are administrative amendments, which are kind of what they sound like when a project needs to make a minor change that doesn't really affect any of the review criteria. They can be approved that way. The Act 250 review process is comprehensive. So it is reviewed under 10 criteria that you see on the screen here. There are a variety of sub-criteria within each of these, but I put this slide up just to show you the breadth of what the review is. So unlike other state permits that that people might get from the Agency of Natural Resources, perhaps for a new septic system, perhaps an access permit from the Agency of Transportation to put in a driveway off of a state road, perhaps development that's impacting some wetland area. Those permits are all targeted and fairly discrete. Act 250 looks at much, much more than what those permits look at. And in fact, it looks to those permits to help inform some of the criteria that are reviewed. So it's looking at everything from whether there's adequate water supply to a proposed development, to what sorts of soil erosion might be happening and what sort of stormwater control needs to happen on these projects, to whether the project is going to have an impact on the local roads and the town's ability to maintain those roads, all the way to whether it conforms with your community's town plan, sensitive wildlife habitat. There are a lot of factors that go into what is a very comprehensive review. So Act 250 jurisdiction is limited. It doesn't cover all development in the state. In fact, it covers very little development in the state. Most development in Vermont does not go through an Act 250 review and get a permit. Most of that is, if any permitting is required, it's handled at the local level, or it's handled through state permits through the Agency of Natural Resources primarily, like the ones I mentioned previously. So jurisdiction typically revolves around how many lots are being created if it's a subdivision, how many housing units are being created if it's a residential project with new development, and for commercial development, what size parcel the commercial project is being proposed on. For a long time, Act 250 has been focused on the size of a project, and that's what triggers the need for a permit. There's always been a little bit of location-based jurisdiction with regard to high elevation areas. So most development above 2,500 feet has required an Act 250 permit for the last 5 decades, but largely it's been based on the size of the project. So that's what changed with Act 181 when it was passed in 2024. The law does a bunch of things, including creating this new board that I sit on to oversee the program. And one of those big changes was to try to create location-based jurisdiction so that Act 250 permitting would not solely be based on the size of a project, but also on where it is. And that stems or is driven by these tiers that Matt mentioned. And so just imagine Vermont as being painted with 3 colors, and all parts of the state will be in one of these tiers. And these tiers are just created to help clarify where Act 250 permitting is and is not or may be required. And so, as Matt mentioned, Tier 1 are those areas where we're looking to reduce Act 250 permit jurisdiction or eliminate it entirely. Tier 3 is the opposite. It's those areas that are very sensitive, critical natural resource areas where more development will be subject to an Act 250 permit. And then Tier 2 is the rest of the state. As Matt said, probably 90+% of the state, where jurisdiction will continue to be based largely on the size of the project, with the addition of this road construction provision that I'll talk about in a bit. But just to clarify, within the Tier 3 areas particularly, the reason Tier 3 is part of this law is not to prohibit development there, but rather to say these are sensitive areas within which good design is necessary. And so a permit process should happen in order to ensure that. So very quickly, we formed a working group last year, about 9 months ago, with about 25 different stakeholders, including representatives from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to try to represent municipalities, Realtors Association, folks who deal with landowners quite a lot, logging associations, the ski areas, as well as ecologists and representatives from various divisions within state government, particularly the Agency of Natural Resources, with an intent to say, where should these Tier 3 areas be? What should they be comprised of? Act 181 gave us 6 resources that we had to consider. They don't have to be included. But the 6 that you see on the left side of this slide are the 6 that were outlined in statute that we had to look at, and then gave us the option to look at any others. And so we tried to take a comprehensive look at the various sensitive resources out there. The nice thing about Act 181 is that the legislature did not try to map these areas or define the rules around them. They understood that they weren't well equipped to do that, and that it required both expertise and a public process to make that happen. And so they vested the Land Use Review Board with the authority to do rulemaking to define all of this. And so within Tier 3, we and you have the ability to sculpt it very precisely, and we have the authority both to do the mapping and to decide how the rules should be structured to balance sort of ecological with policy and people. So these were the resource areas we considered. We landed on just a few of them, and here's some of the reasons why. The working group and the board are not interested in having duplicative permitting at the state level. So to the extent that an existing state permit or a state permit that's on its way into existence covers a resource area, we don't need that resource area to be part of the Tier 3 area, where Act 250 would be triggered in more cases. So wetlands is perhaps the best example that we've talked about. Wetlands are absolutely a sensitive and critical natural resource area, but they're really well covered by the wetland rules administered by the Agency of Natural Resources, to the extent that the legislature didn't even list them as a resource that we should be considering for Tier 3. And so we didn't. We're not considering wetland areas because they're adequately covered through that other program. River corridor areas is another example. We don't have a permit process for development in river corridor areas in Vermont yet, but the Agency of Natural Resources is required to stand up just that sort of permit program over the next couple years. So we decided that, as sensitive as those areas are, especially with all the flooding that's been happening over the last decade and the last few years, that there was a better permit program and review process. Act 250 did not need to be triggered for that area. And so these are just a few other examples of resources that we considered and did not include in Tier 3 because of either incomplete mapping, geographic extents being too broad. Again, we were very interested in Tier 3 being just a small portion of the state and focused on the most critical and sensitive areas, not wide swaths of the state. So what did we end up with? At least in this first draft, which came out in October, and we're in the process of now refining and revising, we came up with significant natural communities, headwater stream areas, a particular subset of those, and habitat connectors. Significant natural communities are sort of ecological types across the land that you would recognize if you were standing in them. So let's say you were walking through the forest and you entered into a very specific sort of red pine, dry, sandy soil forest. That's a particular type of natural community. All natural areas across the state are in some sort of natural community. And the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department has identified many, many different types. But what they've done for mapping is to map some of the most significant examples of those natural communities. And so we worked with Fish and Wildlife to identify just the most rare types of those significant natural communities across the state, and only those that were in the upland areas, not the wetland types, which again are adequately protected by the wetland rules that we already have. And so we've mapped those areas for potential inclusion in Tier 3, along with the 50-foot buffer around them. That's one of the Tier 3 areas right now. Headwater stream areas is another. Problem was, when we began our mapping, headwater streams occupied a huge percentage of Vermont, at least the drainage areas that drain to these headwater streams. Headwater streams are simply those streams and rivers that are at the top of the watershed. They're up high. It's where all the flow begins. And we typically talk about first, second, third order streams. A first order stream is simply one that has no other streams running into it. A second order stream has one stream flowing into it. And headwater streams are generally in that upper echelon, first, second, or third order. So because it covered such a large portion of the state, we knew we needed to refine it and try to find just the most sensitive areas within that. And so we intersected that area with the three attributes that you see on this slide. We looked at areas that had the steepest slopes of 35% or greater, where water is going to run off quickly and potentially do damage to downstream areas. We looked at intersecting that with areas that have poorly drained soils from the Soil Conservation Service maps, where once again, water during a rainstorm is not going to infiltrate as much. It's going to run off quickly. And then we tried to limit it to just a band of elevation above 1,200 feet because gravity matters. And again, when large rain events happen, areas that are upslope in the higher elevation areas are going to have more likelihood of contributing to downstream damage. So we intersected all of those layers and found sort of the union of where they all overlap, and we were able to get the coverage down to just 2% of the state. So that's the second tier 3 areas, headwater stream drainage areas. And then finally, habitat connectors. This is the most interesting one in my mind, and the one that has driven the most comments and concerns from folks. It's a bit of a new analysis with the help of Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And some of you may be aware that Vermont Fish and Wildlife, through the Vermont Conservation Design Program, has used high-resolution mapping of forest cover across the state to come up with maps that show where interior forests are, where connecting forest habitat is. And so we looked at that initially and said, great, they've done some prioritization of where the most important connecting habitat blocks are that create a network for plants and animals to move at the landscape level across the state and across the region, from the Adirondacks of New York through Vermont into northern forests in New Hampshire, Maine, and Quebec. And that's what you see on the left side, particularly in the dark orange, are the highest priority connectivity blocks identified through that program. Not real useful as a tier 3 mapping exercise, because it covers just a very large portion of the state. So what we did was we worked with Fish and Wildlife to identify where those dark orange highest priority blocks were separated and divided, typically by roads, sometimes by agricultural row crops and the like. And then we used another one of their data sets to identify which road segments had really good intact forest on both sides, more than 75% of intact forest on both sides of the road. And we married those together to try to find, okay, where do we have highest priority habitat blocks divided by a road, and we have a road segment that has really good forest cover on both sides that could potentially allow wildlife to make that connection between blocks. And that's what informed the habitat connectors.
So my property value goes down.
All in all, we get to about 5 to 9% of the state in this first draft of Tier 3, broken up into these 3 areas that I just described. And again, we released this in October. We've gotten a lot of feedback since then. I'm in the process of revising the mapping right now. We're hoping to have a new version of the mapping available by the end of April so that folks can look at a second draft and have time to comment and think about that. And we're making some significant changes, which I can go into more when we look at some. I'm not going to bore you with the sections of the rule, which the rule and the mapping are available on our website. We have a page dedicated to Tier 3. But I just wanted to let you know that in these Tier 3 areas, we're structuring the rule so that jurisdiction is triggered only for development, for actual construction on the land, not for subdivision of a lot that happens to have tier 3 on it. Furthermore, Act 250 has kind of a bad name for a lot of folks because once a development project triggers Act 250 on, say, a 40-acre parcel, that permit attaches to the entire 40-acre parcel, even if the development was only on a small portion of it. Well, we don't want that to be the case in the tier 3 areas. We want the jurisdiction to be restricted to just the project area that is within the resource, within the tier 3 area itself, to try to winnow it down. We're also including a site-specific correction option because we know these maps are not 100% accurate, and we want landowners to be able to have a relatively easy process to come into one of our district coordinators and say, "Hey, you've got this spot on my property mapped as a tier 3 habitat connector. I want to do something there. Look at it. It's been a parking lot or a part of my driveway, for the last 25 years. Your mapping is wrong." And so we're including a process in the rules where someone can present that, and a district coordinator can say, "Great, there's no jurisdiction here. Easy out." All of the exemptions that apply through the Act 250 program, there are lots. This program has been around for a long time, and a lot of exemptions are built into statute, including farming, logging, forestry, most home occupations, accessory dwelling units for the moment. All of those existing exemptions will follow through within the tier 3 areas. So even though these are sensitive natural resource areas, these types of land uses and development that are exempt from Act 250 will still be exempt in these tier 3 areas. And we are adding additional exemptions to try to make sure that we don't capture run-of-the-mill development. We don't want someone who's putting an addition on their house that happens to be near a tier 3 area to need an Act 250 permit. And so we're working through changes to the early draft to make sure that doesn't happen, and make sure that if your septic system fails and the only place you have to put it is in a tier 3 portion of your property, that you can do that. And you don't need an Act 250 permit for that sort of development. So, this is where I'll end the presentation side. I'm happy to show some maps next because I think folks might like to see portions of the region and maybe, their town. But this is my contact info. I've been meeting with planning commissions and other community groups for the last few months and trying to respond to all of the questions that are coming in via email and phone calls. But I'm at your disposal. Like, this is a real phone. I will pick it up if I'm there. If not, I'll call you back. I'm trying real hard to get back to everyone via email, within a week or so, sometime sooner. And I'm happy to come to your community's, select board meeting or planning commission meeting in the evening when it works for you. We just need to get it on my schedule. So feel free to reach out. All of this information is on our website, so you don't need to remember it. But just wanted to let you know that's how to reach me. I am the lead for the board on the tier 3 effort. We have 2 other board members that are leading on the road construction jurisdiction provision, which a lot of folks have concerns about as well. And our entire board is working through all of this. So if you have tier 3 questions, really any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can direct you if there's another board member who's more appropriate. So I guess I should say a little bit about this road construction jurisdiction provision. It's unlike the tier 3 areas, which is sort of a surgical tool to identify sensitive areas where more development might need an Act 250 permit. The road construction provision is admittedly a blunt tool. So this is written into statute from Act 181. The legislature essentially was codifying a rule that used to be in effect in Act 250. Act 250, where road development, road construction can trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. And so this provision, which takes effect July 1st of this year, says that any new road longer than 800 feet requires an Act 250 permit. And any new driveway longer than 2,000 feet requires an Act 250 permit. Again, with a bunch of exemptions. This doesn't apply to state municipal roads or utility roads. Doesn't apply to roads that are primarily for farming or forestry, and it doesn't apply in these tier 1 areas where we're trying to reduce Act 250 permitting. But it does apply everywhere else, and that everywhere else is a sizable chunk of the state. So what I would tell you is I can show you some mapping on this, is that my board has been in front of the legislature in the last few weeks to tell them two things. One is we think that we think we need more time. So tier 3, for example, is supposed to go into effect at the end of this calendar year, December 31st, 2026. And this road construction jurisdiction provision is supposed to go into effect July 1 of this year. We recommended to the legislature that they push those dates out. We think that both our board and Vermonters need more time to understand and be able to comment and help shape this new policy. And the reception we got in at least the Senate Natural Resources Committee was positive. And the bill that they voted out last Friday, which is S325, for those of you who pay attention to what's going on in Montpelier and like to watch bills, S325 actually pushes it out further than we even recommended. The bill would delay the implementation of Tier 3 jurisdiction to 2028 and would delay this road construction provision to 2030. So we'll see where that bill goes. It's got to get a vote by the full Senate, probably sometime later this week or maybe next week, and then it will head to the House for them to discuss and decide whether they think it should be the way the Senate crafted it or maybe somewhat differently. And then if it passes the House or some version of it does, differences need to be worked out between the House and Senate, and then it would need to go to the governor for signature. So there's a long road to go in terms of that bill and whether we're going to see some change to the effective dates of these expansions of Act 250 jurisdiction. But my board and I are hopeful that we will see that, and we'll be in front of the House committees that will be discussing this soon to continue to advocate that extensions make sense, and that both the board from a technical standpoint and sort of a workload standpoint and Vermonters need more time to get this right. Okay, sorry, that was a longer set of slideshows than I had hoped to share, but hopefully you have some sense of it. And I'd love to dive into some maps. I'm a mapping person, but I want to make sure that we have some conversation first. And if your conversation wants to see a map, I'll pull it right up. So maybe we could take some questions or some thoughts before we start looking at the maps.
Yep, y'all might want to start with what's in the chat already.
Yeah, and I can read those questions out loud.
That'd be great, Matt, if you could do that.
Yeah. So we got a couple questions in the chat box. So Eileen had a question about the opt-in process for municipalities, which I think we addressed. Melanie asks, Act 250 began as a regulatory process for commercial projects. When did the regulations start applying to private or non-commercial property?
Yeah,
Alex,
good
I don't
question,
know.
Melanie. My understanding, and I'm admittedly new to the Act 250 program. I looked at it for a long time from the outside, but my understanding is that Act 250 jurisdiction over residential development has been around since the start of the law. And so, as I indicated on one of those slides, it's in the past has been very focused on larger subdivisions, 6+ or 10+ lots, and developments with 10 or more housing units. So that portion of Act 250 jurisdiction has been around for decades.
And then a question from Stephen. Excuse me, what animal migration patterns are being considered, and are individual and organizations helping to inform this plan?
Right. So Vermont Fish and Wildlife works with all the critters, and so the migration patterns that they're considering with their habitat block mapping, which was in the orange that you saw in some of those slides, um, that's really based on forest cover and wetlands and riparian areas. And so they're looking at the full suite of species, both plant and animal, and trying to understand where the biggest blocks of habitat are and how we keep them connected over time, so that as climate changes and forest patterns change and as development happens, we don't disconnect those blocks of habitat across the state. In terms of individuals and organizations helping inform this, Vermont Fish and Wildlife is playing a big part. Um, we are the stakeholder group includes several ecologists who are sort of providing an outside expertise outside of state government. Um, but we are also sort of reaching out to both conservation groups and just regular economic development entities like the Chamber of Commerce, the Realtors Group, ski areas, because these questions are not just ecological. This is sort of a mapping exercise, a science exercise, and a policy exercise all wrapped up in one.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Just to share, there's a comment from Krista who notes that we had reached out to Alex with questions about our property and he was incredibly helpful and accessible. So just affirming what Alex had mentioned, that he is accessible and willing to help out with answering questions. Um, Question from Andy Snelling. What is the distinction between road and driveway? Are the length restrictions along the road, or are they the distance from an existing road?
Oh, this is a great question, and this
Yeah.
was really the nub of this road construction jurisdiction provision. Um, so, first, the bureaucratic answer. My board is working on guidance, which we hope to publish in April, that all of you will get to see ahead of the road and driveway construction season here in Vermont, so that people have a sense of what we think the difference is between a road and a driveway. So, stay tuned. Okay, now the real answer. So the statute doesn't define what the difference is between road and driveway. So we're all trying to figure that out. And the distance is really important, right? Because this trigger for an Act 250 permit is more than 2,000 feet of driveway, which, people build driveways that long, but that's a pretty long driveway. And it's more than 800 feet of road. We could argue about whether that's a long road for new development. So there is a distinction. It relates to the length and what the trigger is. And the length restrictions are um, the length of newly constructed road. So if you have an existing private road and you're putting in a short driveway off of it, and you're making some minor improvements to that existing road and then putting in your driveway, that's not what this provision is going to capture. But if you're building a new driveway off that same private road and that new driveway goes 2,500 feet into the woods, that's what this provision triggers. Similar with roads. So there has been some confusion about, like, well, does this apply to town roads or private roads? This is based on new construction. So think of it that way. It's if you have a parcel and you need to build new road to get into it, that's where this provision kicks in. And I'm dancing around the distinction between a driveway and a road because we're still working on the guidance. I have my own feelings about that. And if you listen to our last board meeting, you will hear them. But we're not quite there yet. So we'll see. And all I can tell you is that all 5 board members are really invested in making this as practical and understandable as possible, and trying to give Vermonters as much leeway as we can within the statutory construction. Understanding, like Chris said, a lot of the road construction provision is is laid out in statute, and my board doesn't have the power to change that, but we can try to adopt guidance and maybe rules at some point to get into the details.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Question from Eileen. What is the material difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 in terms of the permitting requirements?
Yeah, great question. Remember, most of Vermont is going to be Tier 2. It's just these smaller particular resource areas that'll be Tier 3. The material difference in terms of Act 250 permitting is going to be the level of development that triggers the need for an Act 250 permit. In a Tier 2 area, it's going to be whether you meet those traditional Act 250 triggers, like more than 10 housing units, more than 10 lots, new subdivided lots, commercial development on a parcel that's over an acre in some towns, over 10 acres in others. So in Tier 2 areas, it's the sort of the status quo Act 250 jurisdictional triggers and this road construction provision that's new. So in Tier 2 areas, that's what defines when a permit is going to be necessary. And in Tier 3 areas, it will be those triggers and smaller development. And that the devil's in the details, right? So where we in these Tier 3 rules define what level of development triggers the need for an Act 250 permit is super important, especially for all of you that have Tier 3 areas or will have Tier 3 areas on your property. And so I would encourage you to look at the draft rule, which talks about, where those exemptions are and sort of what types of development would be required. And know that given the feedback we've received since October, the board is working to expand those once again with the intent to try to make sure that we're not capturing what an average Vermonter would be doing on their property, and potentially up to and including construction of an entirely new home. So we haven't quite gotten there yet, but our discussions over the last couple months have been pushing in that direction to try to keep, even in Tier 3 areas, a permit requirement for more development, not small amounts of development.
Great, thanks. Let's see. Next question. Could you talk about the effort to eliminate some review criteria in Tier 3? So some of that Act 250 criteria that you went through.
Yeah, another really great question. This came up very early in our stakeholder working group, where several of our members, including the representative from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is, one of Vermont's larger environmental groups, and their suggestion was, and others was, these Tier 3 areas are different. And the reason that we care about them is because they represent very sensitive, critical natural resource areas. And Act 250 is a comprehensive review that looks at impacts on schools and impacts on, transportation and roads in the vicinity. So the suggestion was made, maybe we don't need Tier 3 related projects to be reviewed under all 10 Act 250 criteria. Maybe we could just pick the criteria that are relevant to that resource area, make it easier for the applicant, make it more relevant for the resource. Well, as it turns out, the way that Act 181 was written, Tier 3 is just a jurisdictional question, and the law did not give my board the ability to reduce the number of criteria that are used for review of projects in Tier 3 areas. So we went to the legislature and we said, can you give us that authority? We think that it'll make it easier for landowners and more relevant to the resource that's being impacted. And that's another provision that is in the bill S325 that came out of Senate Natural Resources on Friday. It includes language that would give my board the ability to write rules to minimize that the number of criteria being reviewed. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to fine tune the review that way, but we do need the legislation to pass so that we can have that authority.
Okay, next question. This is a great question, this next one. So how will Tier 3 and the road rule be implemented and enforced, especially in towns without zoning? Will construction contractors be trained and accountable to direct landowners to a district coordinator?
Yes, absolutely a great question. These are all great questions, but yeah, we've gotten this one several times. So I should have a very pat answer for you. And I don't. This is a tough one. This is a new concept for Act 250 permitting jurisdiction. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, in some of our districts, um, a very large percentage of permits that we process are after the fact permits from people who didn't realize that they needed an Act 250 permit, or maybe they did and they just thought, they could get away with it. Um, I would like to believe mostly it's people who are well-meaning and just didn't realize. And so this is a real issue. And so I think one of the challenges that my board, as a new oversight board for the program, has is to do better PR and more public outreach and engagement about the Act 250 program, why it matters, why it actually does some good things for Vermont. It's not just bureaucracy, and when it's required. So with all that said, we have more work to do on that front, and it's a lot easier in towns that do have their own local regs and a zoning administrator that we can talk to and say, hey, just advise folks that come in for building permits that they maybe should talk to our district coordinators who serve a similar function and are there to help answer questions. For towns that don't have zoning, I think, it's our PR challenge to sort of make that happen. We are not placing the burden for any of this on municipal officials, right? This is a state program. It's the state's responsibility to educate Vermonters about it. We do want to partner with municipalities to help in that regard, but we're not going to put that burden on municipal officials. So yeah, I think the question is great. Like we should be doing outreach once we get this figured out to contractors around Vermont. We should be doing outreach to the realtors community. And we should be doing outreach directly to Vermonters through PSAs or whatever other mechanisms that we can leverage.
Great, thanks. Next question is from Suzanne. So is a question about how Tier 3 and the road rule might affect the division of a large family plot of land into multi-generational properties.
Yeah, there are plenty of properties and farms and areas out there where people have been stewarding the land for decades or generations, and they're thinking about their kids and they're thinking about their grandkids and how are they going to provide for them, especially with housing prices being as ridiculously high as they are in the state. Um, I was talking to someone just the other day who's saying like the only way that a lot of younger Vermonters can afford to stay and live here and build a home is if their family's able to give them some land to do it. Um, so I'll be honest with you. There's nothing in the Tier 3 rules that carves out an exemption for multi-generational properties or the passing down of land from one family member to another. Um, That's a really difficult thing to do. You won't see that in municipal zoning or subdivision regulations either, for the most part. Uh, and yeah, so I think the best I can say is that if permitting is required in order to create new lots to pass down land to family members, um, know that there is a process and that it's not a stop sign, right? It's not a stop sign and a red light that says you can't do it if you happen to trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. It's simply a recognition that there needs to be decent design and that we're going to have a review process that helps make sure that happens. Um, and I know that's not a lot of comfort to folks who maybe have a fear of bureaucracy and Act 250 permitting in particular and the costs, because there are real costs involved in getting such a permit. But I hope folks can take some heart in the fact that the vast majority of permits are approved and are approved as minor permits that never go to a public hearing. and never have any neighbor opposition. And just so you know, I'm not just blowing smoke. Let me let me share my screen one more time, and show you just a little bit of data from our annual report from this year. Hold on just a moment. So our program submits an annual report to the legislature each year. It's scintillating reading if you need something to fall asleep by. But in any case, we put this out just a little while ago, earlier this year, and provided data for the calendar year 2025, which is the column you see on the right. And then you're looking at calendar year data for some of the past years as well. And of the permits that were deemed complete in 2025, there were 383 applications deemed complete that we worked on. There were 12 that actually had a public hearing. Fully 141 of them were administrative amendments because those were, a prior permit and somebody needed to make a minor change. Forget about those. Of the ones that weren't just amendments, 224 were dealt with as a minor approval, in which an applicant submitted an application, worked with a coordinator, and the coordinator drafted an approval with the help of the commission and just sent it around and said, this project is getting approved unless somebody speaks up. And nobody did. It was only 12 of them that actually were big enough or had a request to require a hearing. So, again, I don't want to minimize the fact that Act 250 takes time. It does. It costs money. It does. And can create some uncertainty for folks because of the potential for someone to appeal. But in the vast majority of cases, there is no appeal. And the approval, happens within a few months, and it's done.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna look to the next question. Annette Smith provided a really helpful kind of explanation of the evolution of the road rule as we had talked about. A version of the road rule used to be in effect and then had fallen out of Act 250. So if folks are interested, I would just encourage you to look at the comment from Annette in the chat box, just providing some of that history. But turn to
Yeah,
the
and just to
yeah
butt in, Matt,
yeah
Annette has been a hugely helpful resource for the Tier 3 working group and the board. She's at almost all of our meetings. She's very diligent, and I think it was just today that she sent us clippings from 1975 newspaper clippings where it talked about what she's mentioned in the chat, where the original road rule came from and how it was evolved. So if you don't know Annette or don't know how to contact her, contact me, and I'll forward you what she sent us in terms of those newspaper clippings. It's really interesting and it's short with easy reading.
just to go to the next question, excuse me, from David. David notes that the Tier 3 designation for habitat connectors imposes significant new regulatory requirements on private property that previously had none. If my land on Windham Hill Road is designated as a Tier 3 connector for the benefit of wildlife movement, why isn't the property tax burden shifted to the public? Is the LURB coordinating with the tax department to ensure that these restrictions automatically result in a reduction in our land's assessed value? And what is the status of H730 and H805?
Yeah, excellent question, David. You're not alone. I've heard this from folks at most of the meetings that we've held. So your first question is why isn't the property tax burden shifted to the public? The short version is that the legislature didn't write the law that way. They didn't include that as a provision in the law. And my board doesn't have the authority to make that happen. I think that the way town listers and assessors value property is important, and it's based on fair market value related to recent comparable sales. And so there is some question about whether having to get a permit, a land use permit, what the actual impact on the fair market value of a property would be, and what will the sales numbers actually demonstrate over the next 3 years, or maybe the next 3 years after all of this goes into effect, if it gets pushed out for a while. So I don't think there's an easy answer there. I understand the policy point that you're making, but I don't think there's an easy answer as to just like, okay, let's tell the tax department to just go do that. I will tell you that the tax department is a stakeholder on our Tier 3 working group, but they haven't proposed anything along these lines, at least not as of yet. And so we are talking to them, but I don't want to fool you. There isn't any real movement along that line at the moment. And honestly, I don't know the status of H730 and H805. I'd have to look those up and get back to you. I'm happy to do that, and feel free, David, to follow up with me offline on those.
Great, thanks. The next question is from Bill Dunkel. So the question is, why are some habitat connectors 800 feet wide and others are 2,000 feet wide? What's the starting point for measuring either 800 or 2,000 feet?
Right. So I think what everybody should know, based on the board's discussion since October when we released the first draft, is that it's very likely we're not going to use the 800 feet. We're probably looking at the 2,000 feet. And those were two options that we put in that initial draft. So it wasn't that it was going to be some blend of that. It was going to be like, well, here's one, here's the other. And honestly, they're tied to this road construction jurisdiction provision. When we talk about critical wildlife habitat, a lot of folks were saying, hey, your habitat connectors seem to be focused on road segments. What about all that wildlife habitat that's not near a road? Like, how come that's not indicated as a Tier 3 area? And our answer was, yeah, all that sort of interior forest habitat's pretty important, or at least some of it is. But Tier 3 doesn't need to be concerned with that, because the road construction jurisdiction, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to say, if you're punching a road that far into the woods, you're going to be in Act 250 review, and we'll have review criteria that will help make sure that it's not completely fragmenting that interior forest. So that was why we did not look at the interior forest areas. We felt they were covered through this other jurisdictional provision. And that's why we focused on the gaps between those areas and the where the blocks were divided by roads. Now, the starting point for measuring that distance is essentially at the road moving out. And right now, the draft mapping that you see is clumsy. It's literally just a circular buffer around these road segments, and so it ends up including areas that it shouldn't. And so part of the refinement that I'm working on, which is why it's taking so damn long, is that I got to look at each road segment and sort of snip it down to where it makes most sense, and to eliminate some of that overlap. The other thing we're doing, which you'll see in the mapping if you go to our website and look at the map viewer, is we're trying to poke holes in that area wherever there's existing development, so that areas around houses, even if they're within one of these Tier 3 habitat connectors, are excluded from the Tier 3 mapping. So that's some of the mapping complications that we're working on, and hopefully you're going to see a cleaner version of it at the end of April, when I finally get my act together and we get the next draft out the door.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Next question from Pete Silverberg. How are projects that are currently underway affected by Act 181 and LURB rules?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're not looking backwards. So, as the Tier 3 rules become effective, we're talking about new development, new construction of improvements within those areas. It's a little harder with the road construction jurisdiction. It's one of the things the board is grappling with. Um, it's particularly inconvenient that the legislature chose to have that provision go into effect on July 1 of this year, right in the middle of the road building season. So we made that very clear to the Senate committee that doesn't work. Like we can't have half-built roads that might trigger the provision or might not, or maybe half of the road does. So I'm hopeful that whatever happens, that'll get changed to a midwinter date. But yeah, we're talking about guidance where if the road is substantially complete and you can drive on it in a normal vehicle, that it's there and it doesn't constitute new road construction after the whatever the effective date is. So sorry, that's not a great answer. But generally speaking, projects that are underway, we're trying to stay away from. And certainly projects that are subject to an Act 250 permit that are underway are already in this mix. Like there's no double jurisdiction happening here. If you're in Act 250, you're already in Act 250.
Yeah. Next question is from Jordan. If someone has an existing driveway that's 800 feet in length or longer, possibly, and they're building an additional home on their property, but they're not extending the driveway, no new driveway being built, would they need an Act 250 permit?
No, simple answer. No.
Thanks. Let's see. The next question from Bill. Can you estimate how long it will take and how expensive it will be for someone who wants to build a new house for a family member within a Tier 3 area to get an Act 250 permit?
Yeah, great question. And I'll give you what is as simple answer as I can give first, and then I'll qualify it a bit. Um, I think that in most Tier 3 areas, for the construction of just a single new home, which typically wouldn't trigger an Act 250 permit, I think that those are likely going to be minor Act 250 permits. Those are the type that get issued in a few months. So that's about how long I would estimate it would take. Um, the cost of the permit, can run, it depends on the construction costs of the home, and there's a formula for that. But there's been some numbers bantered about, and I'm trying to get some real examples so I can give folks a better idea. But you could be in the $1,000 range for just the permit cost. And then it depends. So, an easy permit that doesn't have any issues, that's not sitting perched on a steep slope where there's potential stormwater runoff or erosion problems, or isn't sitting in the middle of a deer wintering area that is protected as a part of the Act 250 review process. A project that doesn't have those issues with it, um, likely your cost is going to be that permit fee and that alone. It's when where you want to build has an issue with some of the review criteria under Act 250 that you then need to hire a professional like an engineer to help you demonstrate how you're gonna do it properly. And that's when those costs can be inflated based on the cost of hiring an engineer. So I don't really have a good number for you for a typical example. It's something I'm working on. I'm working with one of our district coordinators to get examples of small projects that triggered Act 250 in the past, maybe because it had prior jurisdiction for some reason. And my hope is to get you some real examples of what it cost for a project that didn't have to do much versus a project that got stuck in the mud and had to pay more for engineering costs and the like.
Okay, let's see. The next question is from Kevin. Kevin asks, how can a property owner determine which critical resources apply to a particular site included on the Tier 3 map? Where is the information located to submit corrections or clarifying information? And why are directly impacted property owners not directly notified and consulted as stakeholders?
Yeah, good questions, Kevin. So a property owner can determine which critical resources apply to a particular site on the tier 3 mapping through the map itself. So right now, if you look at the tier 3 maps, it identifies the different components of tier 3, the significant natural communities of rare types, the headwater stream areas up on the steep slopes, these habitat connectors. So the maps will contain that information so that when this all comes into effect, however long that takes, the final maps will have that level of detail so that you as a property owner will be able to say, okay, I want to build here. They say it's tier 3, and oh, I see that it's a habitat connector. Um, the rules and our supporting information will tell you exactly how we map that and what the steps were that went into that, so that if a landowner's like, I think you're wrong, and I see in your 5-step process where you screwed up on my property, you'll be able to point to that and come to our district coordinator and say, the map's wrong on my property, and here's why, and be able to get redress, without having to go in front of my board and get a whole rule change, but just to be able to do that, with your specific property in mind. So last question is a really good one. Why are directly impacted property owners not directly notified and consulted as stakeholders? My hope is that we will do that. Honestly, I did not want to do that with the first draft of the mapping because it was so rough. And I wanted to, bring it out across the state and say, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? And the response was substantial. And I think you'll find when we release the next version of the map, especially with regard to these habitat connectors along roads, it's going to be significantly more refined, smaller, less impact. It's at that step, this next draft, where I would like to notify landowners who have these tier 3 areas. The question is one of just logistics and cost. The best case scenario is that we send a letter to all those folks, and they get something in their mailbox. I don't know yet whether that means we need to send a letter to 20,000 landowners or 2,500 landowners. One is probably doable. The other may not be from a just snail mail perspective. So I think I want to tell you, I want to do that. I'm not sure if we can logistically. And so if we can't, the way to do it is every other mechanism I can get my paws on, right? It's these meetings, it's front porch forum, it's working with your municipality to help them sort of get the word out through their town newsletters, local media, those sorts of ways to try to get landowners who have these tier 3 areas in the know.
And just a follow-up question for you, Alex, related to the last question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Senate bill is it? I'm forgetting the number of the Senate bill that we were talking about, but I
S
think there's some
325.
funding allocated in that for the Land Use Review Board to do some of this outreach, because understandably there's cost associated with that, and you don't necessarily have the funding to do that outreach currently.
So we do have some funding. I don't want to make it sound like we have no resources. We
Right,
do.
right, right.
But yeah, the question was asked directly to us by the senators, and they said, "Do you need more resources?" And I said, "Well, of course we do, especially if we want to do mailings to, a large swath of the state." And so they did include some real dollars in the bill. But I want to put all of you on notice that in the years I've been watching the legislature, which has been quite a few, well-intentioned money in bills that drive policy frequently gets stripped out of those bills when they hit the financial committees and the appropriation committees in the legislature, because we just don't have enough money to do everything that Vermont wants to do. So I'm not counting on that extra money, but boy, it would be great if we got it, and we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, and Alex, I'll just note this is one of those things where don't talk to Alex about it. Call your legislator about it if you want the money to be included in that bill, right? So
Right.
not much that we as it's not much that Alex can do about that, but that's something that you as voters can do to appeal to your legislators.
Let's see. So the next question, sorry, the next question is from Melissa. In carrying out the road rule, will towns be required to ask about driveway length and let applicants know of the need to get an Act 250 permit for projects that require a permit? Should towns be waiting to issue an access permit until after an Act 250 permit is obtained?
Right. So, no, towns will not be required to ask about driveway length and let applicants know of the need for an Act 250 permit on that basis. I believe existing law and procedure requires towns when they issue zoning permits and other municipal land use decisions that they advise that state permits might be necessary, and you include some boilerplate language in those decisions or permits. But it's not going to be required that it be specific to Act 250 or related to driveway lengths. Um, for projects that do require a permit based on these road construction jurisdiction pieces, um, I don't think towns should be waiting to issue access permits. That I don't want to speak for the board. We haven't talked about that. So I'm just speaking as one board member, just myself on this. But municipal permitting and state permitting are two different animals, and I don't think that towns should feel like they're waiting or that they're held hostage to when these Act 250 provisions go into effect. Um, Yeah, I think they're two separate things.
Let's see. So there was a question about sharing the LURB's website, Land Use Review Board's website. I did post a link for the LURB's main website, and then also a link. There's a separate page just on Tier 3 in the rulemaking process. I posted that link and a link directly to the draft Tier 3 mapping page. So those are all in the chat box. It's also very easy to navigate to that page, just typing in Google Vermont Land Use Review Board. Let's see. The next question from Melanie. The current draft is available on Vermont GIS, their site. When the map gets revised at the end of April, will a new link be provided or will the current map change? Will there be an announcement that the map has been revised?
Okay, last question first. Yes, there will be an announcement. And just so all of you know, I am collecting email addresses from interested Vermonters. I've got about 400 people on the list so far, and I'm trying to send monthly updates to anyone who's interested in this stuff, so that you get a feel for how things are going. And that's one vehicle by which we'll be announcing, like, hey, the new maps are here and the new draft of the rules. So definitely reach out to me if you'd like to be included on that list. But yes, we'll splash it across our website, and there will be a much more intensive public outreach effort in May and June to try to get this information out. As to the first question, I think my intent, I haven't quite decided yet, but I think my intent is that um, the map link will stay the same, um, and the map will simply change. And what I want to do, and I have to talk to our mapping experts, is I want to have both the first version and the second version available to sort of turn on and off, so you can see how it changed, right? Otherwise, it's going to be kind of hard to figure out what happened in the second draft. So that's my hope. We haven't put it all together yet, so patience, please.
Let's see. So the next question, let's see. The next question is from Krista. You said that Act 250 isn't a stop sign. What would be things on a private property that would be a stop sign? Deer wintering, something else?
Hey, that's a great question, Krista. Yeah, so like I said, Act 250 review is based on those 10 criteria. They're all important. Not all of them can become a stop sign. Some of them are, if there's an issue that crops up, the district commission can't deny the project based on that issue. They can only attach some conditions to address that. So, yeah, what are things that could be a complete stop sign? Honestly, I think I need to get back to you on that one. I want to give you an accurate answer about which of the criteria could function as a stop sign and what some typical examples are of that. Um, Most permits get approved, so whatever those issues are, they tend to get worked out. But let me make a note of that, Krista, and you know how to reach me because we've talked, so I can try to get you a better answer on that one.
And Alex, I would just offer, to the extent there are any stop signs, because I find in Vermont they're actually remarkably few. It'd probably one of those other ancillary permits, not an Act 250 permit, but a stream alteration permit or something like that. If you want to build a house on the edge of a stream, that might be a hard stop on that, on that one or something.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. That's the easy answer, Chris. So I appreciate it, but I want to take it to the next
totally.
level of like what within Act 250 would be that stop sign.
Yeah,
It's absolutely true that if you want to build a house on your property and your septic engineer says, I can't find any perkable soils, like I can't design a system in this location, there just isn't the right soils. That's a stop sign. And you'll probably get that stop sign before you ever submit an Act 250 permit. But if you did submit an Act 250 permit and you didn't have a viable septic design, you would not get an approval. But those are the easy ones. The harder ones are like, okay, so I want to build in a deer wintering area. Is that really going to end my project? Or some other criteria that might come into play. So let me get back to you on that one.
Okay, next question is from Jessica. Jessica asks, what part of the state budget receives and spends the permitting fees, or are the fees redistributed to the corresponding town?
Okay, so Act 250 permitting fees go into a special bucket that helps pay for the Act 250 program. So it's sort of like we're a good chunk of the Act 250 program is funded by general funds, and then a smaller portion of it comes from the fees that are collected. So they don't get redistributed to towns. They get used to help pay for the program itself, the staff that help run the program and add legal notices and all those fun things.
Let's see. The next question is from Christian. Alex mentioned that the goal of Tier 3 is to encourage good design that's environmentally conscious, which sounds good and reasonable. Is the permit cost intended to cover the expert analysis required to review project plans rather than a pay-to-play fee? Is that the intention of the fee calculation formula?
Oh, that's a good question. It's sort of a different wrinkle from the normal question I've been getting about whether this whole endeavor is going to turn into a pay-to-play where just the wealthy get to get their permits and everybody else is stuck, which we should talk about. But that's not what this question was. So the permit cost is not really intended to cover expert analysis, but it does. It is a function of the construction costs, and so it is designed to be higher for bigger projects, which might entail the need for more intensive review. But not really, I guess, is the answer. And the expert analysis that happens is generally something that an applicant does have to pay for. And so there is that sort of pay to play sort of piece of it in that if I keep picking on deer wintering areas because it's easy, and I used to be a wildlife guy. So if the project proposes to impact an area that Vermont Fish and Wildlife has mapped as a deer wintering area, um, and the applicant's like, you're wrong. Like, you're just wrong. It's not deer wintering area. I think I can show you that. Um, then oftentimes they will hire a wildlife professional to go and evaluate the site and render a professional opinion. And that costs money. And the application fees do not pay for that. That's an additional cost borne by the applicant to have that done and to have that submitted. So I hope that helps. But that's, yeah, it really does depend on the nature of the project and what issues arise based on how it's designed.
Thanks. The next question from Krista um, is what would the consequences be for a private homeowner who builds without getting a permit?
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, which was somewhat of a surprise to me when I joined the program, a healthy percentage of permits are after the fact. Uh, and so what happens is the district coordinator or our enforcement team becomes aware of the issue. Oftentimes, it's the neighbor that says, "Hey, something happened here. I don't understand. Like, did they get a permit?" Sometimes it's a municipal official who says, "Hey, this happened, and we don't think they got the right permits." So what happens is pretty straightforward. Our team reaches out to the landowner and says, "Hey, it looks like you did a project and might have needed a permit. Let's talk. Let's figure out whether you actually did need one or not." And then the district coordinator works with the landowner to get an after the fact application submitted, and to get it approved. Um, the consequence is that it's hard to undo things that you've already built. And so I'm going to use deer wintering areas again. If, for example, as a part of your project, you cleared a whole bunch of spruce fir forests that happened to be an important deer wintering area because you wanted a bigger yard or you wanted a nice view, your house isn't going to have to move, but you may have to pay to replant some level of landscaping for that area. You may not, but you may have to. So that's just an example of a consequence, I guess. The other consequence is that there can be a penalty fee that's required for not getting the permit. And our enforcement team has some discretion there, and it very much revolves around the nature of the impact, how much of a particular resource that Act 250 was designed to protect is actually impacted, and whether the work without the permit was intentional, and sort of flaunting, what was required or what was already known to be required. So sorry, not a crystal clear specific answer, but it really is fact dependent on the case. But that's sort of the protocol.
Okay, let's see. I think we just have a couple more questions here. Kind of a follow-up question from Kevin. I still am not clear about how to currently determine what resources were and are being considered for the Tier 3 designation on a subject property and how to address those with the LURB. No town or property owner should be put on hold while maps are drawn from behind the scenes.
Gotcha. I understand better now, Kevin. Your question wasn't so much about what's your recourse once these maps are in effect, but your question was, how do I influence the process now while they're being created? So I'm happy to talk to you about the three resource areas that are currently in the draft Tier 3 areas: the significant natural communities, the headwater stream areas, and the habitat connectors. And I'm happy to give you the blow by blow on how we've mapped those areas so you can understand and question. Um, so reach out to me offline. I'm happy to provide that level of detail. And Yeah, anyone is welcome to address their concerns with that mapping right now, to the extent that you understand it and want to. And you can do that by contacting me and having a conversation. You can do that by coming to one of our weekly board meetings. We meet on generally every Monday afternoon. They're public meetings. They're hybrid, so you can participate from the comfort of your home. Um, or you can come in person. And we have just like most boards, public boards, we have a section at the beginning of every meeting where we allow comments on non-agenda items where it's like, hey, you're not talking about this today, but I want you to hear this. And so you're welcome to come. Um, and if we're talking about it as an agenda item, there's space within that discussion for public comment as well. So yeah, I think that's the best I can tell you. But I hear what you're saying about being put on hold while maps are being on, and frankly I feel bad that it's taken me as long as it is to get from October to the end of April to have just one more iteration of the map. So sorry about that, and doing the best we can to get another version up that people can look at and then comment on.
Let's see. So there's a question from Suzanne, if it's possible to, and maybe we'll save this for the end. But Suzanne was wondering if we could have select board members who are participating in the call raise their hands, and then planning commission members to raise their hands. But maybe we could do that as kind of a final thing. Just I want to see if there are um, any remaining questions. There was a question about Alex's contact information. I'm gonna put that in the chat here. But I know
I just plugged it in, Matt.
okay, thanks. But that's also available on the Land Use Review Board's website as well, Alex's contact information.
Yeah, and as Matt said, in this modern age, nobody remembers websites addresses, right? So don't worry about that. Just go to your internet browser, whatever it is. Seems like everybody uses Google, and just type in Act 250 Vermont, and it's going to take you to one of our pages. And once you're there, just click on the icon for Act 250 in the upper left. It'll take you to the home page, and we have a contact us page that's available there, and it's got all of our contact information, mine included.
So I think that's all the questions I see in the chat box. If I missed a question, if you want to type that in, or feel free to just jump in and unmute yourself too. There were a lot of questions. I appreciate all the questions. Really good questions. So if I missed something, I apologize.
Well, I see a couple, Matt. One towards the end was from Michael. He noticed several
Okay.
properties that are not correct within the GIS mapping, wondering if they will be updated to reflect town property mapping properties. So it's a good question. The state not collapses, sort of combines parcel mapping, property line mapping from all municipalities across the state. And they've created a statewide parcel map, which is really cool. And as you can imagine, is only as good as the data coming into it from the towns. So if the problem with the mapping you're seeing has to do with a property line, it's probably an issue with your town tax mapping. And it may be a vintage issue between like the last version you have and the last version that was sent to the state. There are plenty of other ways that the mapping can contain errors. So just reach out to me if you see something specific and you want to know more about that. I'm pretty savvy on geographic information systems and mapping, so I can usually answer those kinds of questions. And if I can, I can point you in the direction of the people who created the data. There was also there were a couple of comments, not questions. And both Neil Ryan and Jessica Mosley posted comments about sort of equity issues and the costs involved in this expansion of Act 250 and what Vermonters are going to be required to do to get a permit. I just want to echo that it is an issue, and it is one that has come up in our working group meetings from the start, that people have the impression that Act 250 requires a lot of money and takes a lot of time. Um, and and people are worried that this is going to become a state where you have to get a permit, and the only people that can afford to do that are the super wealthy. So what I want to tell you about that is we hear you. And we don't have easy answers. Neil knows that. Neil and I have been talking. But I will tell you that the mapping that you're seeing, which is trying to be as scientifically based, as ecologically relevant as possible, is being trying to be balanced by the rules themselves and the exemptions that we're building into those rules to try to make sure that small projects that an average Vermonter would do um, would be exempt, particularly in these tier three areas. Can we exempt everything that an average Vermonter would want to do? No, but can we exempt large portions? I think we can. And so I would just encourage folks to look at both. Look at and critique the mapping, but also look at the draft rules and be ready to speak up and say, hey, this doesn't look like I can build a home in a tier three area without getting an Act 250 permit. Tell me whether you think you should. And if you have an idea of what that critical footprint ought to be, tell me what you think that is. I've heard from some folks it should be a half an acre. Any Vermonter should be able to do a half an acre's worth of impact within a tier three area without getting a permit. Last draft of the rules, that's what I recommended to the board. We're still trying to see if that passes muster with them. I had other people say 2 acres. 2 acres is like a typical home site. And if you're in the use value appraisal program, you have to take out 2 acres around a house site, right? So why not sync it up with that? That's an idea. It's a lot more. So we're trying to do balance, and the balance happens both in the mapping and the rules. Take a look at both.
Let's see, any final questions for Alex? We covered a lot tonight, and Alex, I appreciate all your responses to the questions we got. There is just a follow-up question about the select board members and planning commission members. Wanting to identify themselves. If folks are willing, we'll go with select board members first. If you're able to use the raise hand icon on Zoom, just to give a sense of who in attendance is a select board member for their community. And I'll just give everyone a minute to raise your hand. And then after select board members, we'll do planning commission members. And if you have any final questions too, feel free to type them in as we're just going through this. So it looks we got a few select board members.
Looks like 3 raised hands on the select board front.
And then if I could ask select board members to lower your hands, and I admittedly always forget how to lower my hand in Zoom. So great job. And then so if there are any planning commission members, if you wanted to raise your hand. Looks like we have 3 planning commission members. I know we had quite a few folks earlier in the evening too, some that have signed off, and I did see a couple other select board and planning commission members that I recognized earlier on. So we appreciate your attendance, and as I mentioned, we are recording this meeting, so we'll post that on our website. We do have information on our website as well about our regional plan update process and links to the Land Use Review Board's website. So as you get questions in your community about Tier 3 and the road rule, please direct community members to the Land Use Review Board's website.
Hey, and I just want to, again, thank Alex and thanks Matt for organizing this, and thank everybody for participating, and really appreciate your civility. I mean, I know these are challenging issues, and one of the things I've really loved about I've worked in other jurisdictions where things are not nearly as civil as what they are in Vermont. So just want to express my appreciation for that, for having just a good conversation about this.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I'm happy to come back in May or June when we have the next version of the maps and the rules. We can do this all over again and talk about what changed and where things are going. I'm hopeful that by May we'll know what the legislature is doing with regard to potentially extending the effective dates of this, which could make a big difference in terms of having the bandwidth to think through it. And yeah, to all you great select board members and planning commissioners, help us spread the word to your communities about all this stuff and send people our way. I worked in municipal government, like I said, for 22 years, so I have a lot of respect for all of you, citizens and board members. And I too served on a select board for 3 years in Westford when I used to live there. So I get it. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day if you celebrate.
Good night, everybody.
Yes. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Take
very
care.
much.